Hello, and welcome to Your Vote Counts, ballot measure program for 2022. My name is Bernadine Anderson, and also presenting today is Tomika Dew. We are members of the League of Women Voters. From the very beginning in 1920 and now over 100 years later, our nonpartisan mission was and is to foster education in citizenship and to support improved legislation. Our purpose is to provide unbiased information so voters can make informed decisions. Members of the League from across the state research these ballot measures and using such things as the Secretary of State website, input from sponsors and opponents, information from legislators and their staff, and verified news articles. Coming to us this year are 4 state measures that have qualified for the 2022 ballot, November 8th ballot measures. Measures 111 and 112 are constitutional amendments referred to voters by the Oregon legislature. If anything unforeseen occurs, they would need to be referred back to the voters. Measure 113 is a constitutional amendment brought to the ballot by initiative petition, meaning signatures were collected, submitted to the Secretary of State by a specific due date in order to be approved and then appear on your ballot. Measure 114 is an initiative petition statutory measure, meaning that if it passes, modifications can be made to it by the legislature or by the courts. Local governments will be addressing psilocybin from the provision of 2022 Measure 109, and they are placed on your ballot by request of your local governments. Now we're going to share some information. We 2 moderators, and there will be some slides that you can also view, and we will be responding to our audience's question. Our first measure today is ballot measure 111, and this says that state must ensure affordable health care access, and it is balanced against the requirement to fund other essential services like schools. We've already said that it's a constitutional amendment brought by the Oregon legislature and is now referred to you. The Oregon Financial Estimate Committee was unable to determine the measure's impact on government spending and revenue. Any spending and revenue under this measure will be determined by the legislature in the future. Yes, a question.
So what happens if I vote for this?
All right. If you voted yes on your ballot, then the Oregon Constitution would be amended, and it would say that the state is obligated to ensure that Oregon residents have access to cost-effective, clinically appropriate, and affordable health care as a fundamental right. And as we said earlier, this right must be balanced with the state's obligation to fund public schools and other essential services. If you place a no on your ballot, the Oregon Constitution remains unchanged. Yes, we have a question.
What were the reasons that the legislature referred this measure to us?
We need to know what came before. And what came before was a Senate joint resolution. And in the preamble to this resolution, it stated the importance of access to health care for opportunity, success, and quality of life, and that this access must be available to all Oregonians, regardless of their circumstance. Currently, there is no explicit right to health care that's guaranteed by our Constitution. Although the number of Oregonians without health insurance has decreased since 2010, when the Affordable Care Act was enacted, the American Community Survey found that a little over 303,000, or almost 9% of Oregonians that are under the age of 65 were uninsured as of 2019. The ballot measure proposal then addresses these elements of the background. It's referred to the people. It amends the Constitution, and it says with this right for Oregon residents, that this would be in place. However, this resolution, this proposal, does not provide any funding or establish any laws or systems to carry out this right. Therefore, any tangible changes to healthcare access as a result of this would only happen as a result of legislative, executive, or judicial action. Further, it requires the state's obligation to guarantee health care to Oregonians be balanced with other state obligations. And we've said this with such things as public schools and other public services. Now, if you were wanting to know what the proponents and the supporters think for this measure, here's what the supporters had to say. The supporters say that there are gaps in the health system that does leave some people uninsured. And even some people who are insured still can't afford health care. Secondly, they would say this lack of affordable and adequate health care hurts families, their finances, prevents them maybe from keeping their jobs and from getting to school. Thirdly, they say because it's not currently a right, people might suffer negative health and financial impacts by having delayed or denied health care. Opponents, however, say the state is promising health care that it can't deliver. Opponents also say government-controlled health might degrade the quality of health care. It limits choices, and it may make Oregonians wait for their care. Thirdly, they would say a government-controlled healthcare system is unfeasible. Oregon Catalyst, which is a conservative online political blog, cites a 2017 legislative report noting that it would cost over $70 billion per budget cycle. Now, let's hear what we can find out from Tomika about Measure 112.
Measure 112 removes language of slavery and servitude as punishment for crime. This measure is a constitutional amendment referred to the voter by the 2021 Oregon legislature. There's no direct financial impact to the state revenue by this measure. Oh, I see we have a question.
Yeah, what exactly do you mean by no direct financial impact?
Good question. The measure itself has no direct financial effect on expenditures or revenues. Any impact will depend on potential legal action or changes to current inmate work mandates. Now a little background about the measure. The U.S. Constitution and the Constitution of 19 states, including Oregon, allow involuntary servitude only when used as criminal punishment. 10 of those states, including Oregon, also allow slavery as a form of criminal punishment. Many of these laws were added to state constitutions in the period from the 1850s to the 1890s. Historically, slavery loophole language was a compromise that enabled former slave states to re-enslave Black people. These states created black codes so that newly freed people could be arrested and pushed back into slavery for vaguely worded minor offenses, such as vagrancy or loitering. Because this language no longer reflects the values of Oregon, an increasingly diverse state, a group of Willamette University students with an interest in restorative justice created the volunteer coalition Oregons Against Slavery and Involuntary Servitude, also known as OASIS. In 2021, the group introduced to the Oregon legislature a bill to remove our Constitution's language allowing slavery and involuntary servitude, which became the constitutional amendment now being referred to the voters. The specific proposal is the Oregon Constitution Article 1, Section 34, which currently prohibits slavery and involuntary servitude, but does allow an exception as punishment for crime. If it passes, It would amend the Oregon Constitution by removing language allowing that slavery and involuntary servitude as a punishment for crime. The ballot measure would work in tandem with Section 41 of the Oregon Constitution that authorizes a work requirement for adults in custody. It is not intended to repeal this work requirement section. Additionally, Measure 112 would add language that permits a court, a probation agency, or a parole agency as part of sentencing to order a person convicted of a crime to engage in counseling, education, treatment, work, or community service as a part of sentencing. The activities must be in line with programs that are already in place to provide for accountability, reformation, protection of society, or rehabilitation. Oh, I see we have a question.
I do. Why would someone vote no on this measure?
While there's no organized opposition to this ballot measure, some may oppose it as they would any measure to amend the Oregon Constitution. Others may believe that because the language of slavery and involuntary servitude is also in the U.S. Constitution, there's no need to modify the Oregon Constitution. Some may also be concerned that it could decrease state revenue from convict labor. Deanie, you have information on Measure 113.
Yes, Ballot Measure 113 is a constitutional amendment, and it's placed on the ballot by initiative petition. And what it does is to state that legislators with 10 unexcused absences from floor sessions are disqualified from holding the next term of their office. Yes, question.
What led to people gathering signatures to put this on the ballot?
That's always important to know, so let's take a look at some background. In the past 2 decades, Oregon has seen a number of legislative walkouts by members of the minority party, which were both Democrats and Republicans. Currently, our state constitution authorizes legislative chambers to punish disorderly conduct, which might include absenteeism. And they do this with a supermajority or 2/3 vote. Punishment may include the expulsion of a member. The legislative rules governing absences are voted on by both chambers at the beginning of each session. Those rules may cover unexcused absences, and they may also specify the process for dealing with those absences. Currently, there's no formal definition in the legislative rules concerning what does unexcused mean, and how many can the legislator accumulate before action is taken. So what does the legislator do if they're going to be absent? They have to fill out a form, and they turn it in to the Senate President or the House Speaker. Then it is determined at that time whether that will be labeled excused or unexcused. Currently, there's no right of appeal against these determinations, and there's no requirement for the Speaker of the House or the Senate President to explain their decision or declare why it was considered unexcused. So what's in the proposal that addresses what currently exists? So in the proposal, the intent of the measure is to define the consequences for these unexcused absences from floor sessions in either the regular or the special sessions. And a floor session is a term we should know. It's when the House or the Senate meet to conduct legislative business, and it doesn't include committee meetings or hearings. In the odd numbers of years, they would have possibly up to 160 of these. And in the even number years, they would have about 35. So if less than 2/3 of the members are present during floor sessions, legislative business cannot be conducted. Yes, question.
Well, what are the consequences of passing this measure?
We should always understand what the decision of our ballot is. So let's take a look at what supporters and opponents have to say about this. So why is there support for this measure? 3 reasons supporters bring forward. There have been 6 walkouts since 2019, and the problem can't be solved legislatively because the opponents will simply walk away before anything can be decided. Walkouts in the recent past have affected Oregonians, and it's prevented action on such things as affordable housing, COVID safety, gun safety, school funding, and wildfire mitigation. Thirdly, supporters say politicians should be held to the same standards as the rest of us. Now, what do the opponents to ballot measure 113 have to say? They would say the minority party may feel that walkouts is their only recourse if they feel that they're not being heard. They also would say that that puts too much power into the hands of the President of the Senate and to the Speaker of the House. And there's no definition for what constitutes an excused absence. Walkouts are considered a legislative tool in the procedural toolkit. I think we want to hear about Measure 114.
Yes, Deanie. Measure 114 would require permits to acquire firearms. It has the police maintain a permit firearm database, and it criminally prohibits certain magazines with some exceptions. This measure is a statutory initiative placed on the ballot by an initiative petition with over 131,000 signatures. The chief petitioners of Measure 114 are members of Lift Every Voice Oregon, a faith-based organization founded in 2019 with the aim of reducing gun violence in Oregon. The intent of the measure is for permit revenues to cover administrative costs. I see we have a question.
Thank you, yes. So why can't financial impact be determined? And what affects the costs of this measure?
Good question. Because there was uncertainty as to the projected number of permit applications, revenue from those applications, and related administrative costs, as submitted by local and state governments, the Oregon Financial Estimate Committee concluded after its review of cost estimates that the financial impact for state and local governments is indeterminate regarding Measure 114. The Oregon Criminal Justice Commission, the CJC, received a written request from a legislator from each major party to prepare a racial and ethnic impact statement for Measure 114. The purpose of the statement is to describe the effects of the measure on the criminal offender population. Measure 114 modifies 4 firearm statutes that impose criminal penalties. However, due to a lack of relevant data, the CJC concluded it is not possible to provide accurate estimates for the racial and ethnic impacts of Measure 114. I see we have another question.
Yes, we already have a red flag law and a safe storage law. Why is this measure on the ballot?
Well, proponents will tell us from the Measures 114's preamble that, quote, studies have shown that permits to purchase reduce firearm-related injuries and death. And studies have further shown that firearm ownership or access to firearms triples the risk of suicide and doubles the risk of homicide when compared to someone who does not have access, unquote. Also from the Measure 114's preamble, quote, restrictions on high-capacity magazines during the 10-year federal ban from 1994 to 2004, and the ban in over 9 states and the District of Columbia have been found to reduce the number of fatalities and injuries in shooting incidents, unquote. One of the chief petitioners, Reverend Mark Knutson, a pastor from Portland, sees it as a way that, quote, residents in a state can come together from many directions and address a public health crisis of gun violence with common sense and well put together legislation, unquote. Yet others have voiced their concern and opposition to the measure. Kevin Sterrett, the executive director of the Oregon Firearms Federation, said in response to Measure 114, quote, numerous police departments and sheriff's offices have agreed that complying with this measure will either be exorbitantly expensive or impossible. None have said they will be offering the training required to apply for the permit to purchase, which sheriffs and local police will be tasked with administering, unquote. The National Rifle Association Institute for Legislative Action said that Measure 114, quote, is yet another anti-gun ballot initiative that seeks to further erode Second Amendment rights in Oregon. It imposes a permit requirement in order to exercise the Second Amendment right to acquire a firearm. Meanwhile, criminals will continue obtaining their firearms illegally, unquote. A little background. Since 2020, the Oregon State Police has reported a sharp increase in the number of background checks on prospective gun buyers in Oregon. This increase in gun ownership has been accompanied by a spike in overall gun violence, including homicide, violent crime, attempted suicide, and an unintentional death and injury. In recent years, the legislature has responded to calls for stricter gun laws, including enacting a background check requirement for gun transfers in 2015, a red flag law allowing the removal of firearms from those who pose a risk to themselves or others in 2017, and in 2021, a law that requires safe storage of firearms and gives certain jurisdictions the ability to ban firearms. A question.
Yes, I just want to know what happens if I vote yes or no.
If Measure 114 passes, it would change current firearm laws by requiring a permit to purchase a firearm. The permit would be issued by law enforcement after the applicant passes a background check, submits a photo ID, completes an improved live fire safety course, and pays a fee of $65 to cover fingerprinting and background check processing. A permit would be issued within 30 days and be valid for 4 years when it can be renewed, would be valid for 5 years when it can be renewed for a $50 fee. An individual would present this permit when purchasing a firearm. Law enforcement would be able to deny a permit to an applicant believed to be a danger to self or others. Passage of the measure would also make the manufacturer, sale, use, or possession of large capacity magazines holding more than 10 rounds a Class A misdemeanor, with some exceptions for current owners and inheritors, law enforcement, and armed services personnel. If Measure 114 does not pass, existing laws would remain in effect, including requiring a seller or transferor to request a background check before the firearm purchase. Current law states that a transfer of the firearm may occur after 3 days if the background check is not completed. Deanie, I understand you have some information on local measures.
Yes, the local measure we're going to look at today regards psilocybin. And voters passed a measure in 2020, this was Measure 109, by almost 58%, which legalized the production and use of psilocybin, which occurs naturally in some mushrooms. This was to be a tool for treatment of depression, PTSD, and addiction in those 21 years of age or older. Manufacturers and providers needed to be trained and licensed. This law required administration through licensed service centers across the state, and this was administered by the Oregon Health Association. Yes, a question.
Yes. Why isn't this measure on every ballot?
This is an interesting one, and because you will see it across the state on many ballots, but not all ballots. Because the second part of Measure 109, as we said, was voted in by voters in 2020, provided that individual cities and counties could prohibit the development of these facilities within their borders if it was first referred to local voters and before the enactment in January of 2023. Currently, statewide, there are 57 cities and 26 of the 36 counties that have placed this prohibition option on your ballot. In Marion County, for example, the number is 24-465. In Polk County, it's 27-139. So you need to look at your ballot because the ballot measures will be different. We also want to take a look at what else will be on that makes it different across the state. Some of you will see that it is a permanent prohibition, and some of the local measures will say it's for 2 years and then to be reevaluated. Now, why did this come, and what do others think? So, supporters have 3 points that they make. They say that cities and counties should have the right to opt out since the Oregon Health Association rules aren't final. They also say that it needs more information on the standards, and also say that many areas in Oregon didn't support 109 in the first place in 2020, and this measure calls out for a local vote. Opponents of the local ballot measure on psilocybin would say that OHA is striving for strict regulations. It provides safe treatment opportunities and standards. They also say psilocybin provides alternative treatment option that may work for many of the clients. And also, FDA has labeled it a breakthrough therapy. So when you go to place your decision on your ballot and you decide to vote yes, then the results would be, if the county is voting for this ban, it affects the unincorporated areas of that county. So there will be some differences there between the county and the cities. If the city, however, votes for the ban, then that affects the area within the city. Some measures, as we have said, are permanent and some will be temporary. So that will happen with the yes vote. With the no vote, it allows licensed regulated facilities, and it will be no change to the current law, which will then begin in January of 2023. We have some closing remarks and information to share with you, so Tomika will share that with us today.
We appreciate your watching this program to become a more informed voter. Please reach out to your community and encourage them to get ready and then vote in the 2022 general election. I see we have a final question.
How about some basic voting help? Where do I go for information?
Terrific question. There's lots of resources to help you. For instance, the Oregon Secretary of State My Vote website can help you check and update your registration and check your ballot status after you voted. Use vote411.org for information on candidates and ballot measures after October 8th. Just type in your address. And watch Capital Community Media channels or go to YouTube for the Your Vote Counts programs. You have until October 18th to register to vote or to make any changes you want on your registration. Ballots go out beginning October 19th and will be accepted and counted if postmarked on or before November 8th. We want to thank Capital Community Media for their expert technical and production skills used to create this program. Thanks to the League of Women Voters of Marion and Polk Counties for the design, preparation of this ballot measure program, and to the moderators and audience that presented it today. And thanks to you for investing your time in watching this program in order to understand the issues in the 2022 general election. Elections matter, so remember to vote, because your vote counts.